Thanks for joining. We're just letting everybody in the Zoom room, and we're going to get started in just a little bit. Our Zoom room is growing. More and more people are getting let in, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, going to give it just one more minute, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us here today to do a bit of a deeper dive in the governor's proposed budget as it relates to the departments of the California Natural Resources Agency. I'm Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our agency, and I'm here today with departmental directors of our largest 7 departments. Now, our agency has, depending on how you slice and dice, upwards of 26 different entities, and we obviously prioritize the budget of all of those entities. Most of the personnel, most of the budget resides in our largest departments. So we wanted to make sure that we had our departmental directors from our largest departments on to share an overview of their budget and answer questions. A little bit about housekeeping today. At any point, you can ask a question in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. That'll show up for us. We're going to leave time here at the end to verbalize those questions and get answers from department directors. Also, if you're asked a question that doesn't get verbalized, just given the time constraint we have, we're recording that, and we're focused on getting that information or an answer back to you. We also are going to share some important or helpful links in the chat function. So as you listen to the departmental directors and myself, you can check out the chat for important links. So look, I'll start off by saying I hope everyone's staying dry and safe. This is a remarkable moment in California. This parade of atmospheric rivers, we think there are about through 6 of 9 or 10 atmospheric river storms. So please do stay safe and stay prepared out there. Huge thanks to so many people keeping us safe during this challenging time, certainly including our colleagues at the Department of Water Resources. Become even more educated and respecting of the work that DWR does, essentially leading our flood preparation and our flood response, working hand in glove with our Office of Emergency Services. Big thanks also to the Conservation Corps, to CAL FIRE, to state parks, to our California Geological Survey, all figuring in to this really impressive coordinated effort to keep everyone safe during these storms. This is yet another exhibit of how California is on the front lines of climate change. Just consider here in the last 4 years, we've had historic wildfire seasons. We're still in the midst of a historic drought. Now remarkable storms and flooding, the longest, hottest heat wave in the American West just a few months ago. And of course, sea level rise and coastal impacts, including what I saw yesterday with the governor in Santa Cruz County with the storm swells of recent storms. So it's clear that we, California, need to continue to lead the world, showing how we protect people from climate change, but at the same time, showing the world how we can reduce carbon pollution and move beyond fossil fuels and critically do it in an equitable way, where we're actually protecting the most vulnerable, and we're bringing everybody up with this so-called green growth transition. We're obviously talking about the budget here today, and most everyone should know this proposal that the governor made yesterday really starts the budget process over the next several months. This proposal would be a budget for the budget year that starts on July 1st. So in coming weeks, we'll be part of legislative hearings on the budget that you can figure into. We're really excited. There are 2 new chairs of our budget subcommittees that have jurisdiction over our budget. In the Senate, Senator Josh Becker from the Bay Area is the chair of that Senate subcommittee. And then in the Assembly, it's Assembly Member Steve Bennett representing the Ventura area. I reached out to each of these leaders and we're already engaged in dialogue around getting them the information that they need to understand the budget. I'll also mention that the governor's budget has manifested or been transitioned into two specific bills that we'll put the link into the chat right now. It's AB 221 and SB 72. So for those who are real budgetary experts, if you want to see the fine print, you can click onto these bills and see how the governor's proposal manifests in the actual bills. So top line, as you probably heard, is that after 2 remarkable years of budget surplus, we face economic headwinds. Global inflation, a tight labor market, high interest rates, sagging stock market have significantly reduced the revenue that we have in California. And as a result, we have a challenge. We have a deficit. We have a gap of $22.5 billion in our general fund. That's the fund that funds most of what we do across the agencies. Now, the good news is governor, legislature, we're planning for this, anticipating this. We have a record amount of budget reserves, so-called rainy day reserves for situations like this. We use those surpluses to pay down debts and liabilities, which is really helpful. And a lot of that surplus was spent on one-time funding, not funding that has out-year or continuous liability. So when we have an economic downturn like what we're experiencing, we can minimize disruption. But that being said, we have to fill a shortfall of almost $23 billion. So we are adjusting our budget and in some cases making incremental cuts to programs. Again, this proposal is the first part of or first stage of the budget process, and we'll be talking more about those adjustments here in coming months, both directly with you and with the legislature. Just want to let you know that the commitment to our natural resource priorities and our climate remains remarkably strong. You may remember that last year, the governor and legislature laid out a multi-year spending plan to combat climate change of $54 billion. This budget retains $48 billion of that climate budget. So it's no doubt this priority, these investments remain really focused on leading the world combating climate change. Major criteria in understanding where we were going to make adjustments or reductions was continuing to prioritize equity and environmental justice and ensuring that we are making investments where needed to protect our most vulnerable communities and ensure that everybody can make this transition, economic transition that we're leading. We're focused on supplanting where we do reduce, supplanting those cuts with federal funding, historic amounts of federal funding between the infrastructure bill and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and we're aggressively pursuing that funding. Many of the reductions where they exist are what are called have trigger restoration, which means that if the fiscal conditions improve, then those cuts are automatically restored in next year's budget and the proposal that we'll make. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then lastly, something David Hochschild from Energy Commission will talk about is the governor wants to work with the legislature to fully reauthorize the Clean Transportation Funding Program known as AB 8. And importantly, the governor signals his interest in exploring a general obligation bond, a new bond with the legislature that would fund natural resources and climate resilience. I'll lastly point out that where reductions have been made, we've been really focused on making those incremental reductions. So in a lot of cases, reducing a program by only about 10%. The way I think about this is we've been able to protect and for most programs, either fully protect them or protect them upwards of 90%. And where there are incremental adjustments, this remains a quantum leap in funding for our priorities from just a couple of years ago. So hopefully that's a good high-level overview. And now let me turn it over to, I think either, let me see if, is Carla on yet? Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Carla Namath, who leads our Department of Water Resources. And Carla, if you're talking, we don't hear you. So let's do this. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Tyler from CAL FIRE.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Joe Tyler, Director at CAL FIRE. What amazing year it was related to wildfire response and resilience and the efforts towards that in 2022. Let me start by acknowledging the women and men at CAL FIRE, the fire service in general, and all of our cooperators related to wildfire resilience and response across the state. Just under 7,700 fires last year for just under 364,000 acres burned. A lot of that contributed to Mother Nature. We give credit there. But compared to 4.3 million acres in 2021 and 2.5 million acres in 2022, significant successes in 2022. My apologies, the 2.5 was in 2021. So as we move forward and look at the administration's investments related to CAL FIRE, we see that we have a budget proposal in this proposed budget of just about $4 billion. That's a net increase of approximately $300 million in the proposed budget, and going upwards of 11,431 positions, a net increase of 139 positions as well. Now, I want to take a moment and preface that the administration is committed to wildfire response and to our firefighters across the state. And therefore, it's important to note that fire protection has taken zero reductions in this proposed budget. We also need to recognize what is still to come in multi-year funding plans from previous fiscal years, including 4 additional S-70I helicopters, 10 additional exclusive use helicopters for 2 more years that we had in 2022, 54 additional fire engines that are on their way on order from the manufacturer that were from 2022's Budget Act as well. We'll see from the previous Budget Act 10 additional permanent hand crews coming forward. So though you don't see those in this proposed budget, we have to recognize that those are still coming forward from previous fiscal years. And the important one of our relief staffing, the administration's investment in taking care of the health and wellness of our firefighters. We will continue to hire more firefighters each year through fiscal year 25 to fulfill our requirements of relief staffing and the commitments made as part of their collective bargaining agreement to make sure that their health and wellness is taken care of. And as part of that, we have to recognize, and we'll see in the budget, the proposed budget, a need to increase training capacity. So we will historically, where we have had training locations in Amador County and Riverside County and Ventura County, we will expand that to Sacramento County and Shasta County as well, to be able to expand the capacity to move firefighters and personnel through their training to get them out into the field to support the people of California moving forward. In addition to that, we have to keep our aircraft maintained and in flight. So annually, we will see increases or proposals coming forward as part of aviation program contracts through our Mintum agreements and our parts and suppliers agreements as well. So you'll see a request in the budget for that. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our firefighters. And an additional way of doing that is to ensure that they have the personal protective equipment that they need to be able to do their jobs, whether it be structural firefighting apparel or wildland firefighting apparel. There are requests in this current budget to take care of them in that area. As it relates to wildfire resilience, equally important, and I want to preface that our firefighters, when not fighting fire, are expected to be able to do fuels reduction. And for the last 3 fiscal years, CAL FIRE has met its fuels reduction of at least 100,000 acres per year in the last 3 fiscal years. And then we move forward to continue our efforts to support an additional 400,000 acres required by the state of California. So as part of a bigger package, we will continue to provide support for forest improvement to small landowners, forest legacy, our nursery programs, tribal engagement, post-fire reforestation, fire prevention projects at our unit level, fire prevention grants, land use planning, funding for demonstration state forests, and wood products and bioenergy, all investments that continue to be made in this current proposed budget. Now, we do recognize that we're going to take slight decreases in workforce development, some of our defensible space inspections, and urban forestry, but we will redirect staff and funding available until the funding is evaluated to be able to move forward into the future to still be able to address those problems and combat this climate crisis at the end of the day. And again, at the end of the day, we can't fight our way out of this wildfire crisis in California. We have to do it together, government as a whole, with private and public partners. So with that, I want to introduce Carla Namath from the Department of Water Resources.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for my technical challenges here. As the Secretary mentioned, we are focused on ensuring that we can maintain investment given all the challenges of climate, obviously not simply with drought, but also with flooding. Not uncommon that we have droughts that end with flooding, but I want to just be clear, I'm not suggesting that this drought is in fact over. We do have coincidental emergencies and do need to continue to address them. So we do continue to make prudent long-term investments across the board in water management. Some particular highlights are an additional $166 million for urban flood risk reduction, delta levees, and important work for the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. I want to mention that what's also critical about state funding in these areas is it leverages both local and federal dollars that enable us to get projects in the ground. So as we're focused, but really both on flood and drought, we are very much tracking spending in Washington, D.C. with the infrastructure bills and other appropriations to ensure that we're putting state dollars in that can leverage. There's significant investment that's required, and it always requires a state, federal, and local partnership. We also have dollars in the budget for dam safety enforcement and design oversight, important follow-on to dam safety regulations that were passed about 5 years ago. Also, some dollars for remediation and rehabilitation of high hazard dams. These are dams that are classified as high hazard because of the populations and the assets that they protect. And then also important investments, continued investment in multi-benefit flood kinds of projects, important environmental components that we need to capture, including things for those of you who are focused on some of our restoration efforts down in the Delta, things like Little Egbert Track, for example. And then we are also focused on important stream gauge assessment and investment. We do that in partnership with our colleagues at the Water Board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is a great moment where we understand the role of stream gauges in localized flooding. Clearly important as we move through drought as well, to enable us to really target stream flows in all parts of the state, where in particular where we have sensitive native fish populations, but also important dynamics that we need to track relative to local water use. So that's really just the highlights. And then I'm not clear, Lisa, who I'm passing it off to, but go ahead and direct me.
I think I can maybe jump in. This is David
Super.
Hochschild.
Thank you, David.
Good morning, everybody. And Carla, let me thank you for all your great work at DWR, and Joe as well at CAL FIRE. Incredible. I'll just say on a personal note, one of the things that keeps me going in this work is the professionalism and dedication of all the leaders of the agencies across the CNRA family under the leadership of Secretary Crocott. Just incredible professionalism and work ethic, and I'm really proud of the whole team. So on the energy side, I would characterize this budget as historic and transformative. Typically at the California Energy Commission, our budget is about a little under $1 billion a year in new resources. This year, the governor is proposing $7.2 billion in state money, and that's augmented by an additional $1.7 billion we expect in federal money from both the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So combined, that's $8.9 billion for a lot of our key priorities around things like transportation. So we're doing $3.1 billion principally for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And the goal is to make that ubiquitous so that you can charge a vehicle anywhere and everywhere in the state with ease. And the governor also supporting the reauthorization of AB 8, which will provide another $1 billion over the next 10 years. And again, for comparison, up until this point, we were doing about $100 million a year only for this activity. And now it's really being supercharged. And that is timed really well because every major automaker in the world is now making electric vehicles, and we need to make it possible to charge everywhere in the state for everyone. Equity remains a major focus for this, and half of our investments in EV charging are going to go into low-income and disadvantaged communities. We're doing the same thing around building decarbonization, which is really an equity-first approach there. $835 million in that space to make homes more efficient and cleaner, and promote all electric new construction and reduce emissions in low-income households. In addition, there's about $1 billion to support electric reliability through a number of programs. $700 million for the Distributed Electric Backup Asset Program, DBA, $295 million for the demand side grid support, and roughly $100 million for this clean energy reliability investment plan. And then on things like long duration storage, what we're doing is really leading the world. Most of the energy storage that's gone in California has been 4-hour lithium batteries, and we have done an absolutely phenomenal job on that as a state. We've gone from 200 megawatts in 2019 to 4,500 megawatts today. That's equivalent to more than 2 Diablo Canyon nuclear plants over the course of 3 years in terms of capacity. But that's only 4-hour lithium. So we're looking at other longer duration chemistries that provide 8-hour to 100-hour service. We have $330 million in the budget. And to Secretary Crowfoot's earlier point, we did have to take a haircut in the budget, but that went from 380 million to 330 million. And that's sort of the strategy, I think, across the budget, is to do relatively modest haircuts, but where we maintain that issue area focus. And the same is true for offshore wind. We're doing $45 million for offshore wind, which will help support us in achieving the state planning goal, which is 25 gigawatts by 2045 and up to 5 gigawatts by 2030. And as we're doing this, very intent on supporting in-state manufacturing. It's a priority for the governor and for the administration to bring the manufacturing jobs here to California. We have some additional loan programs to help support that. We're also doing $100 million to support green hydrogen. And one thing I would say in closing is that there is the opportunity, if the economy rebounds further, to add back the cuts that were made. And so, certainly that's our hope. But even with what we have, combined with the federal money, this is going to be historic and a game-changing budget for our clean energy future as we progress towards the governor's goal, the state goal of getting to 100% clean energy future. So I'll stop there and pass it over to my friend, Chuck Bonham, the director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you, David. I want to do 3 pretty quick, top-line, simple things for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I haven't seen all of the 600 participants in the call in the new year yet, so I would just say to everyone, Happy New Year. And please continue to be vigilant. I hope you and your family and friends are safe in this extreme weather period. So here's the first thing. I attest that we are in a much better place right now in 2023 than our department's budget was back in 2008 through 2011, when we saw another significant downturn in the economy. And that's because with the governor's leadership, Secretary Crofa, Department of Finance, overall, we're more resilient. So my first point is, if you're thinking only about our Department of Fish and Wildlife, I would ask you to kind of dial down your concern or worry, take a deep breath. It's actually a promising kind of situation for us. All of the very large and significant groundbreaking things that we're currently working on, from our wetlands restoration and granting, a first time ever $100 million to use directly around the state for salmon, the assessments of all of our hatchery infrastructure funding to modernize all that for a climate-proof future. And for those of you that are our beaver warriors, rest assured, all that stuff we're working on right now is full speed ahead. All those big things held. We're not seeing kind of cuts for us in those really important areas. And for that, we owe a big thanks to Wade, the whole team at the Department of Finance, Joe, Matt, Crystal, Sergio, and of course the governor. Second point, you now know, because it's been posted, there are a series of additional proposed budget change proposals for our department for this upcoming budget. If you think narrowly, they may not seem like they're connected to big biodiversity outcomes, when in reality they are. I'll give you a couple examples. My third and final kind of point to make. Some surgical investments, again, thanks to Governor Wade and Finance, can have great return on investment. So most of y'all know our department, with many other of our colleagues, faces an increasing workload to modernize all of our infrastructure in California, bring on board more renewable energy in the ocean and on land. That's a big workload issue. You will see in the proposed budget a serious commitment to new permanent positions at the department to make sure that modernization also does right for our biodiversity goals. Second example, a lot of y'all on the phone have worked on wildlife corridors and transportation issues for some time. You know that a landmark bill, Assembly Bill 2344, was passed. Assemblymember Friedman and others comprised a humongous delegation to Montreal, Quebec recently for the Conference of the Parties on the Biodiversity Convention. Wildlife corridors is a top-tier global issue. This budget proposes permanent positions for our department to work with Caltrans to get more corridors done faster. Last example, righting a long wrong, we have proposed new 5 positions to really implement all the things we need to do in the Klamath River in conjunction with the world's largest dam removal project. So with that, let me turn it over to my good friend and our colleague, State Parks Director Armando Quintero.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Chuck, and thanks to all my colleagues at CNRA. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the park staff in the field and all of the supporting offices of parks that are coordinating emergency response efforts in this moment of multiple atmospheric rivers. I was down in the Santa Cruz area yesterday and met up with the governor and Wade Crofut to look at some of the damage down there. And I just want you all to know that in the field, it really is all hands on deck right now, from heavy equipment operators to administrative support teams, our maintenance team, scientists, protection staff, which includes swift water rescue teams, which are all very busy right now. So please know that it's the teamwork of these parks professionals who are hard at work protecting the coast and protecting the public in your state parks. And as you know, the state park system represents an extraordinary set of examples of the state's diverse habitats, landscapes, historic sites, cultural resources, and recreation areas. And the governor's budget continues to implement California state park programs and policies that are reflective of the foundational elements of access, inclusivity, equity, and environmental protection. We are committed to advancing outdoors for all through enabling safe, equitable, and enjoyable access to parks. Open space and includes open spaces, natural resources, and recreational amenities for all Californians. I want to highlight just a couple of areas in this budget that are really important. And I'll begin with Dos Rios Ranch. And that's the proposed newest state park, which is just 20 minutes west of Modesto. And the governor's budget includes $5.8 million in one-time funding and $3.3 million in ongoing funding from the general fund to establish and open Dos Rios Ranch as a new state park and create recreational opportunities and park access to a historically underserved community and communities in the Central Valley. Expanding park access in the Central Valley is a strategic part of State Park's future, as outlined in the State Park Central Valley Vision Implementation Plan. The Dos Rios property has been a leading example of green infrastructure that lowers flood risk, protects endangered species, and brings life back to the San Joaquin Valley with the work that was done by River Partners, which has been completed over the last 10 years. And recognizing Dos Rios now as a new state park allows California to lead the way in natural resources management and groundwater recharge projects while opening 1,600 acres of land to the public and creating new recreation and education opportunities, again, in a historically underserved area. Part of this budget also includes statewide parks program funding. And this is the largest park-related grant program in California's history, with over $1 billion appropriated for this program to date. The governor's budget maintains general fund commitments of $230 million here, and should there be sufficient general funds available in the 2024 budget, $150 million will be restored to this program. We're also looking at our outdoor equity grants program, and the governor's budget maintains $75 million in funding for the Outdoor Equity Grants Program over 3 years. And the Outdoor Equity Grants Program empowers youth and families with outdoor leadership education, career pathways, environmental justice engagement, and access to nature. And these are just 3 of the programs that are a part of this budget. And as Chuck and my other colleagues at Resources Agency have said this morning, I could not be prouder to be a part of this team working across departments to achieve some really incredible goals. And thank you.
Thanks so much. And on to David Shabazian, our colleague who leads the Department of Conservation.
Thank you, Wade. I wanted to also start with a recognition of folks in our department here at the Department of Conservation. We have the California Geological Survey Division that Secretary Crowfoot mentioned earlier, and I just want to recognize their good work at identifying the slides that are happening across California, those landslides. We have over 100 now. They are available, those folks are available to communities to help them assess the potential for more landslides. And unfortunately, with this super soaking that we're having of our lands in California, this slide potential is going to last for quite a few months. And so we need to be on alert, and our geologists are available to help with assessing those areas where that are slide potential or slide prone. So I just wanted to kind of shout out to those folks who are working really hard to look up and down the state at these landslide and debris flow incidents. So I'm going to talk about 2 programs today that are part of the larger nature-based solutions package that was initiated last year. The first program that I'm going to talk about is already ongoing. It's the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program. And that program provides grants to regional coalitions that are building capacity to repurpose their agricultural lands in order to reduce their reliance on groundwater and to deal with drought. So this program is critical for helping farmers and communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, plan for reduced groundwater availability, and then to implement less water-intensive uses across those landscapes. The range of uses that we're talking about are things like dryland farming or rewilding to that landscape, or installing renewable energy, And that program then is providing several benefits across these regions, such as better community health, ensured economic well-being in these communities and across these landscapes, more strategic use of the floodplains to start to recharge that groundwater and using these grants to do that. And then finally, recreation. So providing more recreation opportunities in these areas where this land is going out of agriculture and we're finding something else to do with it. And that's really important because these alternatives are really important because simply fallowing agricultural land often doesn't really generate a lot of economic or environmental value or benefit. And so this is a way to keep that landscape in some sort of productive use so that these regions and these communities can benefit from those lands. So recognizing these benefits, the governor and the legislature over the last 2 years have put $90 million into this program. And so last year we did our first round of awards in May, and we were oversubscribed by more than double. And so that with what the interest that we're seeing this year in this round of funding is clearly demonstrating to us and to the governor that this is a really important program. And so the governor is proposing to extend this program and the state's commitment for a third year by adding another $20 million in this budget. So that's one program. The other program, again, part of the nature-based solutions package, is the Climate Smart Lands Management Program. And this program was conceived in recognition that California depends on a broad network of conservation partners to help implement programs that better position the state to harness its natural resources for a range of important environmental and economic benefits. And so many of these partners have expressed to us a need to expand their capacity in order to improve their ability to deliver strategies and projects that help achieve the state's ambitious climate resilience and biodiversity goals that were called out in particular in the governor's 2020 Natural and Working Lands Executive Order. And so this program will address this shortfall by funding capacity building within these organizations and really meeting the needs of these partners to help them improve their ability to deliver projects and leverage funding to meet these natural and working lands goals. So in addition to this capacity building, the program can also provide technical assistance and training to partnerships within these regions that are accessing these funds. So the program has $10 million in the current budget, and the governor's proposing another $6 million in next year's budget. So this total of $16 million really provides an important complement to existing resource programs that meet the demonstrated need that, for example, in the land repurposing program, and other successful land conservation and land management programs, such as the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program that we have here at the Department of Conservation, as well as other programs that are complementing this across the Resources Agency. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Bruce Saito, who is the Director of the California Conservation Corps.
Thank you, David, and welcome and good morning to everyone. And thank you all for participating in this discussion. Those that are out there.
Hey, Bruce, you're coming in and out. Your audio is coming in and out.
Okay, how about this?
Yeah, just get real close and use your theater voice.
Okay, thanks, Wade. So the CCC's proposed 23-24 budget will support the Corps to continue our important and critical work. In fire prevention, we will have 28 Type 1 permanent fire crews working in partnership with CAL FIRE. That's more than 500 Corps members working in fire prevention. In fire protection, we will have 9 Forestry Corps crews working statewide in healthy forest and fuels reduction work. And in addition to that, using SB 901 and greenhouse gas reduction funds, we'll log nearly 100,000 hours of Corps member hours doing, again, healthy forest and fuels reduction work. Our nature-based solution project will continue, and we'll work closely with the 14 local conservation corps. And we're really, really excited that we'll be finally rolling out and implementing and developing and instituting tribal youth corps, working with tribes throughout the state of California. And of course, we will continue our energy conservation work through our E-Corps program, and we're projected to log more than 250,000 hours of Corps member hours doing energy audits and energy retrofits with public and nonprofit institutions. And of course, we're going to continue to do the emergency work that's been talked about a lot about in this past 30 or 40 minutes. Just as a reminder, in 21-22, we logged more than 1,291,000 hours of Corps member hours responding to emergencies. In 2021, we logged more than 1 million hours of Corps member emergency hours. And as an example, today, we have 24 crews out fighting floods, and that represents more than 339 personnel or Corps members. So all this can happen because, and we're going to continue to focus on our Transition Navigator program. About 4 years ago, we launched a pilot program to do really help Corps members in this kind of job and career pathways. And that's resulted in tremendous work, and we're going to continue that work in partnership with California Natural Resources Agencies, as well as other state organizations, departments, and agencies to really find that, support that pathway for Corps members. As an example where we've been successful is last year in 2022, we placed more than 200 Corps members with CAL FIRE and other fire service agencies. And this is really important for us because besides doing this incredible, great natural resource conservation work and the emergency work, this really for us embraces the governor's, this administration's, resources agencies' commitment to a California for all. Corps members, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Corps members, and all Corps members, finding opportunities and career pathways with other state agencies. With that, I'll end my comments and turn it over to Wade for questions and answers.
Hey, thanks so much. And we actually stayed within time, which is great because there are a ton of questions coming in. Again, got over almost 600 people in the Zoom here. If you have a question, a comment, you can share it by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We've got a team working to answer questions in real time via text through the Q&A function, and then we're going to do a little round robin and ask questions on the video here. We are getting a bunch of questions from either scientists within our agency or those that support the scientists within our agency around real intense concerns they have about the pay and compensation that scientists receive in our agency, at Cal EPA, across state government. Many of you that work with scientists may know the concerns around the pay and from their perspective, the differential in pay between scientists and other classifications of state employees. So, I've made it very clear, and Jared Blumenfeld at EPA and Yana Garcia, his successor, have made it very clear that scientists are the lifeblood of our agency. We make decisions based on science for obvious reasons. And so we need to recruit and retain quality scientists. We want this to be a place where scientists make their careers. And so compensation issues are a major concern to us. I want to be clear that ultimately, as secretaries at these agencies, we don't make the decisions around compensation. Those are made through the collective bargaining process that California HR or Cal HR manages. So we've made our position clear, both privately and publicly with Cal HR, which is we need them to do everything that they can to provide for compensation that's going to be competitive and attractive to retain scientists. That being said, I know it's been from the scientists bargaining unit perspective, a frustrating discussion over the last couple of years. But I can tell you that we're going to keep on vocalizing, emphasizing, elevating the importance of scientists and the compensation that they receive. I next want to turn to Carla. There's a question about atmospheric rivers that seems really topical given the storms. And essentially, asking about the investments that have been made to better understand atmospheric rivers and whether those are being continued in this budget.
Thank you. We have invested about $10 million over the course of the last couple of years in our partnership with the Scripps Institute for Weather Extremes. There's more money there that to cover the research that we need to do in the out years. And I think this is a year where it becomes really clear how critical this kind of research is to support on the ground decision making. And frankly, it this year also really highlights the uncertainties that remain, particularly as it relates to the lead time that we have. It really is only about 72 hours where we consider that the quote unquote forecast window, where that can trigger a lot of our pre-positioning and work with county emergency services. So a big focus of our research moving forward will be how to have greater predictability, which enables greater lead time, which would ultimately produce, better responses on the ground. And all of that work will continue to be supported through previous investments over the course of the next several years.
Thanks, Carla. Question for David Hochschild. Jim asks, regarding the CEC's Climate Innovation Program, it appears that there was a delay of $150 million in funding until 26-27. Is there any funding available before that time?
Yeah, that is correct. There are other funds that will serve a similar purpose. So one of the things we're going to be very focused on with that, for example, is battery manufacturing. And we do have some additional money in the ZEV package that we can dedicate that is in fact just going to be cash grants rather than loans, which is what the Climate Innovation Fund is. So we will be able to continue to advance those priorities, but through different funding sources.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I want to just recognize some concerns that have been raised on specific programs. And there'll be opportunity for more discussion here in coming weeks and months, both between us and the legislature. I don't think we can get into too deep answers, but I at least wanted to give voice to concerns. Julie from River Partners concerned about the impact or the reduction of $40 million for a new program called the San Joaquin Valley Floodplains Program. Obviously, we're focused on expanding seasonal floodplains that are helpful in times like this. There are a number of current programs, including through DWR's multi-benefit projects line items that fund floodplain expansion. But I just wanted to give voice to Julie's concern about the impact on that promising new program. I want to share that Susan raises a concern around cuts for coastal protection and resilience, both at the State Coastal Conservancy and the Ocean Protection Council. I will say significant funding remains both at the OPC and the Coastal Conservancy to make significant progress to address sea level rise and coastal impacts of climate change. She identifies large cuts made there. And I think from what I understand, part of the reason for the size of the cuts is just the size of the increase last year. And so we're trying to ensure that programs can move forward and actually receive more funding than they ever have, but obviously make those incremental cuts. But I wanted to give voice to that. Just a couple more here. Victoria asks a question about reductions to urban greening and urban forestry. And I believe, Joe, just that urban, can you give a summary of what has been cut to CAL FIRE's urban forestry program?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Wade. So if we're in the proposed budget, we will be looking at a reduction of $10 million in the urban forestry budget. It does not mean that we don't continue our efforts in urban forestry and the initiatives that are going forward now. And as mentioned previously, should triggers be met to be able to restore funding in future years, that will certainly be considered.
And then, so urban greening, schoolyard greening gets done through CAL FIRE's urban forestry program and also through a direct grant program that our agency and the Office of the Secretary manages. and my budget folks will butt in if I get this wrong, but I believe there's $150 million that have been allocated, or I should say 250 million have been allocated in recent years and in coming years for that program. And this proposes to cut 100 million of the 250 with 150 remaining. And because nobody's
That's correct, Wade.
okay, great. And then Wendy from the California Association of Local Conservation Corps articulates a concern about the impacts within the nature-based solutions budget, specifically on local conservation corps. I think she accurately points out that the cuts that are made there would significantly reduce funding to local conservation corps. We have our California Conservation Corps that Bruce leads as the State Department, and then local corps. Just want to acknowledge the work that the local corps do, both on helping us build climate resilience and so much more, but then also create a workforce and a pipeline or pathway to diverse leadership in our sector. So I want to note that concern. There's also a concern, for what it's worth, about a little less germane to the budget, but since there are advocates on explaining this, concerns around the use of synthetic turf. So Armando, just know that there's questions coming in around concern around synthetic turf at parks generally, and at state parks as well. Let me then turn to Joe again. How will the budget affect the forest health and wildfire prevention grant programs? I don't think there are proposed cuts there, but you can correct me.
Yeah, there are no proposed cuts there currently. We will continue those grant opportunities. And in fact, just recently, I think in the last week or two, we just announced a solicitation for $306 million in grant opportunities in those two programs.
And just given the severity of the catastrophic wildfire crisis, I believe that 98% of the wildfire budget was protected from cuts. Where cuts were made, the criteria was to avoid any cuts in projects that are directly putting sort of protection measures on the ground. So those two programs that Joe just mentioned that aren't being cut, those are getting grants out for specific projects protecting communities. So a real commitment to avoid impacts there. Hey, David Hochschild, Chuck asks, will the proposed budget affect or reduce the attention that the CEC gives to evaluating and reducing methane emissions from the oil and natural gas sector?
Good question. I'm actually not deep on that particular area. I don't know the budget allocation for that, so I don't want to speak out of turn. Okay,
got it. Fair. And this is, I'm a big believer in getting these questions out there, and then we will get them answered. What qualifies for a trigger restoration? So Brian or Amanda, a lot of folks, advocates, understand trigger cuts in the past, which are, if the budget goes south, this thing is going to get cut. Now we're talking about the inverse, which is we're proposing a cut beginning in July that would be restored in the following year. We have Sergio, who's our key partner at Department of Finance, who can probably best answer this.
Yeah, good morning, Sergio Aguilar with Department of Finance. So maybe just to give a little brief overview of the trigger and how it functions, there's a control section that you'll find within the budget bill. It's control section 3.94 that identifies the various solutions that are part of this trigger. And the way it works is it identifies that on or before January 10, 2024, the Department of Finance shall determine if there's excess general fund in the 24-25 fiscal year to restore the solutions, specified solutions that were included in what would be the enacted 23-24 budget bill. And then that control section actually goes further to define what it qualifies as excess general fund, which is really general fund after we meet our kind of baseline commitments and other constitutional commitments. And so the way this trigger works is it's kind of an all or nothing trigger where either they all get triggered back on or nothing gets triggered back on. But we were selective in the pieces that we included within the trigger. And so when we're speaking about the climate budget, what was a 54 billion, and now we're at 48 billion. The reductions within the climate budget that are not being shifted to another fund source or just being delayed, a year or two, for the most part, all those reductions are included within the trigger. Now, there's other reductions across the state budget that are not included in the trigger, which really just goes to show the continued commitment from the administration on climate programs. But we're saying if the revenue picture improves, these climate-related reductions would be triggered back on, which means they would just go back to normally scheduled programming.
Thanks, Sergio. And I should say, we should all be proud of both the legislature, the governor, but also the Department of Finance for planning for this downturn. We talked about a $22.5 billion gap we have in the general fund, but actually the cuts that we're talking about are significantly less than that because of a lot of planning and appropriate use of reserves and delaying liability payments, et cetera. So Sergio, big thanks. But in layperson's terms, what you're saying is the vast majority of the $6 billion, that's the difference between the 54 billion and the 48 billion of climate. In other words, the proposed cut would be restored in the subsequent fiscal year if the general fund conditions are strong. And there's obviously a bunch of fine print on that, but that's basically the takeaway, right?
Correct.
Okay. Hey, Dan asked a question about the bond and, can you talk more about details of the potential bond process? And I'll simply say we're really at the beginning of the discussion. The governor in the A pages, which are the budget narrative, and in his budget address yesterday said that he's interested in exploring a bond with the legislature. So more to come on that in coming weeks and months. We're getting towards the end, just a few more minutes. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about, I'm trying to see if there's anything that we didn't. Lisa, do you want to jump in and ask any questions that I'm not getting to here?
Sure, thanks, Wade. Scott Lipton had a question about energy asset procurement, maybe for CEC and DWR. So maybe folks can talk a little bit about that.
And his specific question is, how does the governor's budget impact the investments made last year and the ongoing commitments in energy asset procurement at DWR, as well as programmatic investments through the CEC?
Carla, do you want to start or you want me to?
Why don't you start, David?
Yeah, so there's a number of different programs. Some of them, like the demand side grid support program, which is about $300 million, we're just providing more money for existing assets to better dispatch when the grid needs them most, right? So incentives for people to do battery dispatch, et cetera. Then there's a bunch of money for new additional assets. And I did want to say one thing we're doing that I failed to mention initially, when we're doing procurement for new systems, there is a focus on, for the clean assets, to support disadvantaged communities, in particular tribes. So we've now funded 8 tribal microgrids in California. These are solar battery microgrids. And just to tell one quick story on that, in Humboldt, where they just had very severe outages, we had 2 microgrids up there that operated and kept the power on, serving almost 20,000 people. And so we're a big believer in that. We'll be doing our 9th tribal microgrid early next year. And so equity expresses itself, I think, even through the procurement on some of these resources. But DWR is doing a lot as well. And I'll turn it over to Carla.
Sure, thank you. So DWR's role is to, as you all are likely aware, is to support what we call the Strategic Energy Reserve. And this is a program whereby DWR interacts with local energy providers to establish things like emergency generators. We are investigating the potential for extension of once-through cooling. Slightly different category is the extension of Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. But fundamentally, DWR's role is to enable a set amount of megawatts to act as a buffer in the event that we have heat domes or we have other kinds of supply chain problems. As a general matter, it tends to be just extension of less renewable energy sources. So we are working hard to transition away from those. But these are a buffer that is meant to be called and scheduled by other parties, Cal ISO and others who are in the driver's seat around energy policy in California in the event that these energy sources are needed. So there are additional dollars in the budget for DWR to complete this work, in addition to important staffing needs that the department has. We do have a new deputy director for our Office of the Strategic Energy Reserve, and about 30 positions that we are currently filling to help support this new role for the state.
Thanks so much, Carla. Lots of information. I think we got through a lot over the last 60 minutes. Couple things. One is we are recording this presentation and we'll be providing a link to this presentation on our website, resources.ca.gov. Also, Brian or Amanda, can you email or put in the chat, I should say, the right email from somebody on your team if people have very specific questions? Not necessarily effective outreach for advocacy, because that'll evolve, but if people have very specific questions, there's been a few about how to read certain things in the budget bill. I'm hoping that one of you can put either your email, there it is, Brian Cash, who is our Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration. Lastly, thank you. Over 500 people joined the call. I imagine almost every one of you advocates for natural resource conservation, the priorities we all collectively have. Huge thanks for the work that you do across the state. We are focused on continuing to get billions of dollars of investment from the governor and the legislature out the door to you to make a difference across California. So really appreciate your engagement and look forward to more of it here in the coming weeks and months on the budget. Thanks again, directors, and stay safe and stay dry out there, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Wade.